What would you say is the most difficult part of being a homicide detective?
It's a lot of weight on the mind just being exposed to the most terrible things anyone has ever done day in and day out. And I noticed that too, even when I know there's like a true crime podcast, so people want to hear about this stuff, so it's totally fine. But I notice that sometimes when I'm like talking to friends or people who I haven't seen for a while who are like, hey, tell me this crazy story or whatever. And, and then you see the room like go cold and you're like, oh, shit, like maybe I shouldn't have said that.
All right. Colin, thank you for joining the Mugshot podcast today.
You bet.
I'm very excited to have you here. You are our first former homicide detective, and so I've got a lot of questions for you there.
Oh,
but you're
boy.
also doing something really amazing right now when it comes to social media investigations, and so I want to learn more about that personally. I think that's a very intriguing thing. That being said, I wanted to start off with an introduction real quick for you, just so we can let everyone know who you are. So,
Sure.
today's guest is someone whose career is as thrilling as it is complex. Colin Piazza is a former homicide detective who has transitioned from the gritty streets of law enforcement to the cutting-edge world of digital investigations. As the founder and CEO of Sleuth Incorporated, the premier social media investigations company in the U.S., Colin is now solving cases in a completely new way. From discreet research and surveillance to locating people and cracking cold cases, Colin's expertise has made Social Sleuth the go-to choice for Fortune 500 companies, law firms, insurance companies, and even private investigators nationwide. But before founding his groundbreaking company, Colin served as a sworn homicide detective with the Colorado Springs Police Department, and he gained invaluable experience in everything from gang task force operations to high-stakes homicide investigations. Welcome.
Oh, that's a good intro. I like that.
Hey, man, you know, what can I say? You deserve it.
This show is sharp. It's like I like your background there as well. Looks really
Hey,
good.
thanks, man. You know, that actually just came in. We had that about 2 weeks ago is when I got it.
Nice.
And it's been nice to have an actual sign. We had a picture of Elvis Presley there that lit up, but the camera couldn't quite pick it up. So hopefully that comes across a little bit better.
Oh yeah, it's looking good. I love that kind of stuff, and happy to be on the show with you today, Chris. Appreciate your time, and look forward to talking. But yeah, before I went into law enforcement, government, all that kind of stuff, I had a music studio back in the day in Canada, and I think we have a shared passion for video and audio and all that kind of stuff, and so I like that. The lighting, and I'll tell you the biggest thing that people always forget with these podcasts and stuff like that is the audio. And so
Sure.
It's nice. We're on Riverside, which we both use Riverside. And so they're not affiliated with the show. Maybe they are for you, but it's nice because you get that clear audio. And so you get that, it's nice to have that set up. But I always find that people ignore the high quality audio with these things. They always focus on the video, but they forget about the importance of the audio. So that's great. But yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit first, and I'll let you lead the show here. But we were talking off camera about being called to like testify at court and that whole process. Can we chat about that for a second? I mean, we were both cops, right? And we worked for the same department, not together, but there was some overlap there. But that's probably one of the most annoying things about being a cop, right? Just like being called to testify. And like, can we talk about that for a second? All the waiting game there.
I'd love to. I mean, it's kind of interesting, and to our viewers and listeners, I was talking with Colin about having to go to jury duty today, and as a former officer, I've never experienced anything going up for selection, and so that was a very interesting experience to see it from the public's point of view as opposed to law enforcement. But now, you being a former homicide detective, I mean, like, when I looked at my case reports, an average case, you're looking, 7 to 10 pages for a well-documented, assault or something like that. But I've read quite a few homicide cases, especially when I was helping out the cold case unit. And I mean, we're talking case reports that are like this thick. So I'd love to hear how you prepare for something like that. I mean, tell me about, you walk into court, you got to testify. That's intense.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like, they'll set upstairs, right, in CSPD or whatever. It's, they're upstairs. That's where all the detectives and stuff were.
Sure.
Like to preface it, there's a lot of people outside myself that are probably much better in that world that, lived and died by, a detective unit or homicide or whatever. And so for me, it's like, when I joined the department, I was always volunteering for those extra opportunities like the gang task force or, all the OT kind of stuff that we could do. And I did get an opportunity to move up there and work some of those cases and stuff. I mean, I think there are a lot of people like, whatever, there's the show with like Kenda or there's, Derek Graham, who we worked with before, who are truly, artisans when it comes to, homicide investigations.
Is it true that you guys have a shrine to Joe Kenda up there when you were in Homicide?
I don't know. But like, I'll tell you, yeah, I mean, when I went up there, it's like I wanted to do that just to learn more. And so that's where I gained a lot of that experience. And, I dipped, and I'm sure we could talk about that too, to start a private sector company. I think we have shared values there on the entrepreneurial journey. But, just, as a disclaimer, it's like, yeah, I was involved with a bunch of stuff up there. I learned a lot up there, deployed with a ton of stuff. But, there are other people out there that, that's their whole career, right? A lot of those guys go up to homicide or those special units, and then they never return from the abyss, right? They live there for 20 plus years. But anyways, yeah, I mean, it's different, right? And so I noticed from like the patrol kind of standpoint, every department's a little bit different. I've been seeing that more in the private sector, pulling, FOIA requests and reviewing police reports associated with cases and all that kind of stuff we deal with, when we're touching a criminal investigation with our company. It's different with every department, isn't it? And so sure. I think with, our last spot there, we were pretty in depth on the patrol function. Doing a lot of kind of like what a lot of detectives would do when it comes to like follow up. They had kind of a loose leash, right? You could really run with a case if you wanted to do pulling video surveillance. You could write an arrest warrant, search warrant. You could do a lot of that. Some departments aren't like that. They're kind of more skimming the surface onto the next call. You punt it right upstairs, and the detectives do all the heavy lifting. But yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is they just have more time with the case, right? I mean, it's like as a patrol cop, you're tied to the radio, call to call to call. And with the detective units, you can really just kind of dig into it a little more. So they would give you more of a loose leash to really like, explore the spider web of the case and loop in the intelligence analyst to look at like, how are these like gangsters connected with other shootings? And then, like, start to tied together casings to other incidents. And it's just, I think, almost more fun in a lot of ways because you can really just dig into it more, right? And I always tried to get my feet wet with that on patrol every time I would have an opportunity to kind of like, you get like the Pope's blessing through your sergeant and say, hey, can I run with this over the next couple of days? And they were pretty supportive with that. But with a homicide unit, they just give you more time to do that. And it is very different when it comes to writing. And so that was kind of the biggest thing I had to learn when I started, which is, like you said, the reports in a patrol function are 1 or 2 pages. And even that is more than all these other departments do that are half a paragraph. But up there, it's just anything you're articulating in your report, you expand upon, right? And so that's the biggest thing. And so you turn, a witness interview into 5 pages instead of like a 2 or 3 sentence, subsection on a report. And so there's a lot more that you do there to really kind of expand. And so it's all the same stuff, but it's more expanded, isn't it?
Yeah, I've always been very impressed with the detail of homicide reports. In fact, it was really funny when I was in the impact team. I had a coworker who's now on homicide. He's been there for 6-7 years. And I thought my case reports were top notch, man. I mean, I was doing everything I could. But if you don't have any like detective experience, you've just been a patrol officer for 6 years.
I know.
What you think is top notch is not what is actually top notch. In this particular detective, maybe one day I'll be lucky enough to have him on because he's a good friend of mine. But
Nice.
he hands me one of his reports and I read it and I was blown away. I was like, this is the level of detail I wish I knew I could have gone to. It didn't strike me to do this or this or this. And it was very eye opening. But at the same time, with what you said, I mean, I know I was talking with one of my other guests about how CSPD patrol officers, I mean, the expectation is essentially take it and run with it, with the exception of certain cases. I think a death of undetermined origin, that's not necessarily their place. They'll do the preliminary investigation. But in other circumstances, if they have a felony and they can take it and investigate it, more power to them because it helps free up the detectives. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm sure you have like newer cops watching, and as you build your audience, you'll get more people looking to move into the field. I've had a few of those people over the last years reach out to me and say, "Hey, how do I get started? Or is this of interest?" And I always tell those people just go on a ride along, yeah, and not just one, but with like a couple different people because that'll give you more insight if it's for you. I mean,
sure.
It's easy to watch this stuff on YouTube when you go to a hot call and you have to get out and it's like, no, you're not waiting in the car. Like, we're going now. It's like, that's a quick way to kind of gut check your career path. And, it's the same with attorneys. We work with a lot of attorneys too. And I think they see that too, because that career path is always glamorized, right? When the status of being an attorney and I don't know, the money is kind of inflated when it comes to reality. Obviously, there's some top people that make a lot, but a lot of them are more like 70, 80 grand a year. But
Sure.
It's not until they actually get into an associate position with a firm and they have to start. It's kind of like Homicide in that way. Like, they expect you to be working 2 hours of overtime every single day and all this kind of stuff. It's a bit of a gut check there. But, I do think, like you mentioned with CSPD and, them allowing you to expand on areas and look into more stuff. I mean, that's the best thing you can do, right? I mean, if you're involved with a department, and not every department's like that, but look for those opportunities. If you're trying to get better at your craft, where if you see an opening in the case that you can dig into, do that, right? And so I always got so frustrated with people that we worked with when they were like cutting corners and, and they were just like, oh, that is something I could look into, but I'm going to leave that for the detectives. Or yeah, they'll dig into that later. But it's like, one, that's lazy police work, but two, it's like you can use those opportunities to like build your resume, right? And so that's where, like, when I did go apply for that unit, I had like a stack of stuff that I printed off of all those kind of opportunities where here's an opportunity where I was on a case and, I wrote a search warrant for like cell phone records and that tied me to, a suspect or something. Or it's just like, here's a case where I started running with it and tried to build the web out there. And so that is important to like take those opportunities, right? So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I tell you what, and going back ever so slightly, I think I heard a few moments ago you said you were in Canada. Are you from Canada originally?
Yeah, so I grew up in Victoria, Canada, which is on the west coast. It's like a giant island. If you say island, you think like a tiny little island off the Tampa shore here where I'm at. But
Sure.
yeah, it's a big place. But yeah, I grew up in Victoria, Canada, right next to Vancouver, next to Seattle kind of area.
Interesting. So where did that like passion or desire to join a police department come from? And how did that lead you to become a homicide detective in the first place?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. It's like my background growing up, I was like playing in bands and music and stuff like that. And I always had the entrepreneurial thing, which is what I'm into now. So I had a little mini record label that put out a few things and stuff like that. But yeah, that was my past. But I always had an interest as well. Like, I have like, the two sides of your brain there. The other side of my brain from the creativity was like this interest in true crime and investigations and law enforcement, all that kind of stuff, which is like obviously kind of two very different paths that you might take, right? But yeah, so my wife and I, we met up in Canada and she's American. And so we decided, hey, this is a good time. We're going to move down to the States. And so it's kind of a good timing for me. I had like been playing in touring bands and managing acts and releasing stuff for like 10 years. And it was just like a good time to like try something new. And I always like to try different things. It kind of keeps life interesting. So that's where I kind of started down that avenue there. And so I said, well, I should look at going into law enforcement. Like what a pivot, right? But in life, I think you can literally do anything you want in life, right? If tomorrow I wanted to like go sell vacuums, I would just start researching vacuum companies and learning all the ins and outs of that industry. And then I would just launch it. And it's like people get trapped in this, like the rat race. How many officers did we see that were like 8 to 10 years in, and you probably had more time on than I did, and they get to that mid-level spot in their career and they hate it. They want to do something else, but they don't have the courage to break, right? And so it's like, I know that's a more complicated calculation because you have your mortgage and family and obligations and everything that goes with that. But you can. I mean, it's like you can pivot. So that's what I did. So I started taking courses in criminal justice, built up my qualifications there, and then just started applying for police departments.
Nice.
And I applied for a bunch of different ones because they said, to get hired, you can't just apply for one, right? And so I applied for Alaska PD, I think Anchorage. I applied for CSPD was another one. And then I applied for Chicago PD because my wife was from Illinois. That's where I was living at the time, and somewhere else. And I actually went and tested for Chicago PD. And did you ever test for like a big department like that? Ours was like a mid-sized agency, right?
It's really interesting. So I was actually born and raised in Colorado Springs. And I naturally, when I had a desire to join law enforcement, it was just a good starting point. I was like, we'll try it out, because I was still a little bit, I had been on a ride along, but I was kind of undecided. I had been in the Marines for 4 years, and I said, well, maybe that would be a good place to go and utilize my skills. And I thought it was really cool being able to help people. And I was fairly lucky in the fact that I tried one time and they took me right into that academy, which
Nice.
I know can be pretty rare. I think a lot of people try out for many different units and kind of cast a wide net, but no, I only tried out for CSPD. So how was the process for Chicago?
Well, I mean, on that note, I think having the military background, you were part of the Marines, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And so I think that gives you really some actionable experience. And I know everyone's role is different within the military. I think there's this misconception that everyone is in heavy combat zones or whatever. But whatever your role is, that does give you actual experience, because there's a lot of parallels in law enforcement when it comes to chain of command and staying in with those SOPs and working well under stress. And then you have all the military training and firearms training and stuff like that. So I think that gives you a leg up, right? And it should. Yeah. And so that's probably, why you see a lot of people from military backgrounds going into law enforcement, getting kind of shortlisted. There's a lot of parallels there. There's also a lot of things that are very different. I'm sure you could elaborate on that more, but that's cool. I mean, for Chicago, it was crazy. I took the train up to Chicago, and they had, I think the average department probably gets like, depending on the size, 500 applications to 2,500, probably less now because of the culture and the industry, but they're still pretty sought after position. So there was 20,000 people that were invited to test for Chicago PD, just to test for the written exam. And so they split it into 2 days. And, I walked into the conference center there in Chicago where they put on all the car shows and stuff like that. And it was literally, there was, I think 9,700 people in this room with me. It was like a concert. Everyone sat down.
Really?
Yeah, it was pretty surreal. And so it's like, I mean, these days, you apply for a job or something and you see, 3,500 applicants applied for this on LinkedIn or something, you know what I mean? And people are always ranting about the job market right now, and it is brutal out there. But talk about a way to like see your competition when you're sitting in a room next to 9,500 other people. So that was that. It was weird. I tested really high on the exam, but the way they do it in Chicago is it's like a lottery system. And so if you pass, they don't rank it based on score. It's just a lottery. And so you get military preference, as you should, and you get a local resident preference, as you should, because they want people from that culture and area to represent the community there, right? That's important. But
Sure.
yeah, so I got put on the top of the list, or the bottom of the list, I should say, in the random lottery to move forward. And so I just started applying to other places. So while I was on that wait list, I actually applied and got a role as a correctional officer at the Sterling Correctional Facility. So working for the Department of Corrections out in Colorado.
How, I mean, that in itself has got to be a heck of a learning experience. How was that working in the prisons?
Yeah, I mean, it was great. I mean, talk about a good way to like get your feet wet in law enforcement. And it's not like, how we were talking, the difference between, a patrol function to a detective unit. It's kind of the same through correctional officers. It's like correctional officer, not to put down the profession, you probably get trolled by a bunch of COs, but like is the stepping stone to, a sworn position as a police officer, right? You're just more in depth as a police officer. But yeah, I mean, it was awesome. It was a great learning experience. And you're just kind of thrown into the fire, so to say. So like Sterling Correctional Facility is they have various custody levels in Colorado. And so it's, minimum, and then minimum restricted, then medium, and then you have close custody, which is like all the gangsters and, violent felons and stuff like that. And then you have maximum, which they're in a cell all day long, essentially by themselves because they don't play well with the others. And so that's where I work. So it was in the middle of nowhere in Colorado, basically prairies all around. And then you just have this fortress that you see. And so have you driven through Sterling before?
Not that I can recall, actually. That sounds like a very impressive sight, though.
Yeah, so Sterling, it's a funny spot because people always stop there, at least for gas, because it's like the only city in this whole prairie. So people always have to stop in Sterling. So like when they pull into the city, all you see is this giant fortress, and maybe throw an image there later when you're editing this thing. Sorry, I'm gonna have a quick drink.
Oh, go ahead.
So it's just this giant fortress. So when you get a job with like the Department of Corrections, it's the same thing. You just like draw a straw, and wherever they need you, they send you. And so they sent me to the closed custody housing unit in Sterling Correctional Facility. So I was like surrounded by all those like violent felons and gangsters in the like cell where they interact, their housing area. Some people are assigned to like external security. Some people are assigned to oversee them in the kitchen or whatever. But I was really lucky because I was like right in the thick of it. You know what I mean? Like right.
Sure.
That's where they're living. That's where you can really get your feet wet on interacting with some terrible people.
Was that pretty terrifying though? I mean, because I know that you guys don't have or when you were in that role, not a lot of correctional officers, right? So you're in there outnumbered with these violent offenders. I mean, how did that feel on a day-to-day basis?
Oh yeah, it's brutal. I mean, and we can get into this more as we go, but like law enforcement is when you face all this kind of stuff, it's the same in the prison, and then you see it on the street, and then you see it when you go out to like violent crime scenes as a detective or whatever in that world. You're exposed to like so much trauma and stress. And I think people who get these jobs have a natural resilience to that, right? I mean, that's what they look for when they hire. It's what they try and weed out during the training protocols. And so, we have a natural resilience to that kind of trauma because that's why we did it for so long. But I always equate it to just like little cuts. And so like every time you go on a call for service or you go out to a scene, you see a dead body there with its head like shot off, or you are dealing with a prison riot. It's just like little cuts and little trauma. And so you just like squish that down. But what I find is over time, once you stop, and I don't know if you felt this or not, and we don't need to talk about it today, but I do find that stuff, once you stop and like now that we're not directly in that stressful role, that's when that stuff starts to like cycle back a little bit. And it's like, it's not a bad thing. You recognize it and you come up with, coping mechanisms and stuff like that. But all those little things that you interact with through that career, it does like create a lot of trauma on your brain, even if you don't realize it. And so I do think that's why, like, there's the statistics with a lot of officers, officer suicide is really high with a lot of people. And you see that a lot after they retire. And I'm not a clinical psychologist, so like, this is just my opinion as an uneducated man. But I think that's what happens is when people retire, then that like weight, that blanket gets lifted off them. And that's when they have to like start dealing with all that kind of stuff. And that's probably what happens. But anyways, I went off on a tangent like I like to do. But the prison, it's kind of trial by fire. So when you walk in, we always used to joke, you kind of walk in as a group, right? And so you were like walking to your housing unit there. We always used to joke, it's like, what life decisions did we make to like get ourselves into this situation? But yeah, you're like, you're heavily outmanned. I mean, I think there was the housing unit where I was at was split into 3 different little sections, and each section had 3 different tiers. And so when you're in there, typically when we would go in, they're all free, right? They're only in their cells at night. The rest of the time you're walking around. 2 people, right? Just like we used to go to calls for service, 2 to a call typically, except you're surrounded by 200 people who hate you, right? And so that's a lot of like weight, right? And it is extremely dangerous. And there were situations where, people were assaulted and they did have, correctional officers killed throughout the years and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it is a sketchy environment to say the least.
Sure.
It's their world. It's not your world. You know what I mean? It's like, it really is their world. But yeah.
I mean, I can only imagine. On a call for service, I can think of one time where I immediately realized that I was in a very bad position and where I was kind of outnumbered, and it was really interesting. So I was working Sand Creek, and I get it was a noise complaint at a house. And so I go there and you can hear people in the garage, and I was like, okay, well, I'll just knock on the garage, tell them to keep it down, no big deal. So I knock on the garage and they open it up, and they were all gang members, Bloods. And there was probably, I don't know, 25 to 30 of them. And they were wearing their colors. And I'm there by myself, and then I have a cover officer pull up, and they were, I don't know, it was a very interesting thing because I could tell, if they wanted to do something, I mean, I would do everything I could to defend myself for a minute, but you'd get quickly overwhelmed in that particular scenario. And luckily, actually, they were very cool. We told them why we were there. They agreed to keep it down, no harm, no foul. But I still remember thinking in the back of my head, like, ooh, man, if this goes wrong, this could have disastrous consequences. But even that can't feel as bad as like a correctional officer, because at least there, I'm out and about. If I have to retreat while I'm calling in cover, I can go wherever I need to go. But you guys are in kind of a enclosed facility. That doesn't make it any better.
Yeah, I mean, that is a sketchy situation too on the street, right? And so like a lot of those guys, if you can get them one-on-one, it's like you can really start to develop a rapport, right? And so they let their guard down. And it's the same thing as a police officer, right? Like so many of the officers, they get into that robot mentality where they have to like maintain that kind of facade. And I think the best officers and detectives and COs or whatever that you work with understand that, like, okay, there's a time to have that, right? With officer presence and all that, the dynamics that go along with that. But the best people that were the best officers and stuff that gathered intel are the ones who like leave that to the side and just like talk human to human. And so I think, for those newer officers, like they always get so stuck in like, oh, I'm going to be, Mr. Badass Cop. And you're the you're the suspect and whatever. But like, if you actually want to like gather intel, you want to kind of like put that ego aside and try and find that like connection with people. And so that with the gangsters, I found that if you can get them kind of one-on-one, you can develop a bit of a rapport. Now it's like both sides, they're always playing each other, right? Like you're trying to play them to get intel and to develop that rapport, or to try and de-escalate a situation, and they're trying to hustle you so you don't find that like gun in their bag, or if it's in a prison, that the shank that they had hiding in the freaking outlet or whatever in their cell or whatever. But there is if you can get them one-on-one, it's a lot easier. When they have their colors on or in a group mentality inside the prison, that's where it's like they're trying to front, and it is sketchier. With the prison, it's like, yeah, you're unarmed. You have like some pepper spray that doesn't do a whole lot against some dude who's just jacked and working out all day, and there's 6 of them. And then they have, weapons and stuff. On the street, you have guns. And so that's where it's scary, right? There's a lot of guns. Like, how many of those gangsters are carrying a gun on them? Like almost every single one.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
it's sketchy.
It's really interesting too. When I got out of the Marines, I know you talked about the officers where it's hard for them to break that facade, I guess you can say. They, to the outside world, they are the robot, and it's really a newer officer thing. Like, they're trying to figure out how to conversate with people. But I fell into that totally, man. I got out on the streets, and I knew how to talk to people, but I didn't understand the dynamic between being a cop and like being friendly. And it was a little bit of something I had to pick up along the way. And it was really interesting to me. I had a sergeant talk to me very early in my career, and he's like, have you ever considered just having a conversation with them? And I because, it was all business. Like, oh, tell me what happened. I want to know what happened.
I know.
And I don't know. After that conversation with the sergeant, he's like, dude, just be a human. Just go and have a conversation with them. And if it ends in an arrest, fine. If it doesn't, as long as you treat them with respect, who knows? Maybe you'll have an informant, or maybe you just have a contact on the street that maybe you can get, information about a certain thing going on. And it was because of that one conversation that led to me wanting to be a hostage negotiator. And I was a negotiator for 5 years. And by the end of my career, or at least my patrol career, I loved having conversation. You see me walking down the street or going into a restaurant or something like that, a fast food to get some chow, and I would be talking everyone up just because it was a good way to meet people. It was a good way to show them that you were involved and that was your sector. You're their officer. So, but so that being said, I want to ask you a few questions about Homicide, and then I really want to hear about your company because I know that's really interesting to me. So just to get these Homicide ones out of the way, because I know we have a lot of viewers that are very, true crime is such a big thing, and I agree. I find it fascinating. Let me ask you, when you were a homicide detective, okay, you get a call, maybe you have a little bit of intel on what's going on, or you read the case report and you're going to go follow up. Once you immediately get on scene, what are the first few things you're looking for to look for potential evidence for any particular case? I mean, you go in, what are you immediately looking for?
Yeah, I mean, so the way it works is like we had different teams, right? And so I think with our department, every department is different, but they split it into 2 teams. And so 1 week, your team of 4 or 5 people is on call 24 hours a day. So you're going to stuff during the day, and you might get call outs at night. And if it's on that week, 7 days, you're responding to that. If it's the next week, it's the other team, right? You're both working 9 to 5. And so if it's a on-call week, what would happen is like the day's over, you go home, you're like tied to your phone all day long. And then you're going to get a notification. Hey, we have a call out. There's a shooting that happened in the parking lot of a Sears or something. And so you're going to get all your stuff together. And I always used to joke with my wife. I was like, oh, it's the ding of death, because it's like in the middle of the night, you're sleeping, and then it's bing, because you got to keep your phone on because you can't sleep through a notification. It's like, fuck. It's like we're getting called out at like 3 a.m. and it's like the ding of death has hit again. So that's what I always used to call it. But so then, you have 20 minutes, you got to leave the house. And I hated being on call. I noticed that I used to help my wife's uncle who had a snow plowing business. And same deal. It's like you're on call, and it's like, I don't know, maybe some people like it. I hated it. So you get called out, and basically they give you the broad strokes. Hey, this is what we got. There's 2 guys in a parking lot. Patrol responded. 1 guy got shot. There's shell casings there. There's a red SUV seen, fleeing the area. They've set up containment as in patrol or whatever, for example. Here's what I want you to do. And so the way it would work is your team would separate into different deployments. And so one person would typically be deployed to the scene. And I think in movies and television, the old CSI effect is there's another written question on every, qualifying exam to become a cop, the CSI effect. There you go. There's a freebie for you. But
sure.
Everyone thinks you work the scene every time, right? Every single homicide hunter is work in the scene. But the way it works is you typically separate it. So one detective will go to the scene. They're assigned the scene. One detective will be assigned the suspect. So if they have someone in custody, that's your job. One detective will typically be assigned like follow-up. So they're going to start pulling video surveillance. They're going to start talking to witnesses on scene, all that kind of stuff. And then one is usually assigned, to write the search warrants if it's a house or a car or anything like that. And so this, but I'm going to talk to anyone else who's like listening. Anytime you have like a shooting or a crime scene or anything you want to look into, it's not like in the movies where like, okay, we're just going to start going through the house and pulling evidence, or this is a suspect's car. They pulled it over and he fled down the street or whatever. We'll just see let's see where the gun is hidden in the glove box. Everything stops. And so they lock down the scene, they make it safe. And then it's who's writing search warrants, because you want to get into that evidence legally, right? So if we just find the gun, but we got there, and then you're thinking 6 steps ahead, it could get challenged in court, and then the whole case gets dismissed. And so search warrants are really important to make sure anything you're finding is like, tied up, squared away, it's not going to get challenged down the line. So one person is writing search warrants on the house and stuff. So if you were assigned to the scene, like your question, you would respond there, and typically your sergeant's there, keeping an eye on things, and you're going to coordinate with, the cops that are on scene who have set up containment. And so if it's a very narrow little scene, if it was like in an alley or something, they're probably just going to like tape off the alley. If it's in a field or something, it was outside a high school, they might like really go wide. And so that's when it comes to containment, you got to do it specific to the scene you're being called out on. And then you're going to get that initial information. Hey, you're going to walk up. Hey, what's going on? What happened? What do you guys know? Give me the broad strokes. Because, on that text, the ding of death, you just got 2 sentences, right? And so you want to get more of what's going on. One of the guys I worked with upstairs who is doing this, one of the guys who really knows what they're doing it a long time, right? He gave me some information, which is probably more insightful than my own. But he said, all right, Colin, when you get on a scene, here's what I want you to do. Don't get the broad strokes or whatever from the cops on scene, but don't let anyone tell you their opinion as to what's going on or what they know about the like blood splatter evidence or what they know about the gun type or like what they know about the motive, the means, opportunity, all that kind of shit. Walk through on your own. Don't let any of that cloud your vision. And so walk through that scene and kind of look at what's going on and be mindful of the evidence, right? Because evidence in and evidence out, and get an idea of what you're looking at. And so you're going to walk in, and if there's a body, if we're talking about homicide or potential homicide, maybe it's an accidental death, maybe it's not, you're going to walk there and you're going to take a look. And they're not going to like cover up the body like they do in the movies because it could jack up the evidence, right? And so you're going to watch this and you're going to walk around and you're going to take a look. And if it's a gunshot victim, you'll kind of look on the entry and exit wound. And if it's someone who's been beat to death by a bat, you're going to see where that bat is in proximity to the body. And you're going to walk through that front door. You're going to walk around the house, and you're going to get a assessment of what's going on with the scene without anyone tainting your opinion. Because
sure,
how hard it is, right? When someone plants an idea in your head, now you're getting that tunnel vision. And that's rule number 1 with investigations is avoid tunnel vision, right? Throughout.
Yeah.
And so once you do that, then you can start kind of narrowing in on what's going on with the case. But that would be the first couple things. And then it's, you're documenting the scene through photographs. You're calling out your actual crime scene investigators who are a civil position, and they're going to do a lot of that evidence collection for you and start pulling swabs when you're ready to do that. So you're not going to do that until you've done all your kind of investigation, stuff like that.
Can you think of a particular case that you're able to talk about that was very memorable or chilling or anything you encountered?
Yeah, I mean, I'll try and talk in like broad strokes so I don't like jack up any cases, because with like any homicide case, and we help with this stuff on the other side now or whatever, but it's, that thing could be going to appeals for the next 12, 15 years. I mean, really forever, right? If it's
Sure.
like, I think Colorado got rid of capital punishment, but we're still involved with cases for, change of venue and challenges and stuff like that with capital punishment cases with social sleuth. And so I'll be mindful there. But, you just see, I guess I'll talk a little in broad strokes. You see just a lot of different stuff. I mean, it's anytime there's any kind of questionable death, you're responding, right? And so some of them are pretty clear. It's like a gangland shooting or something like that. You know what I mean? Because they saw people having a disturbance and then they were throwing shots all over a parking lot and someone gets hit. And then there's a lot of more like questionable ones there where there's a body found and they're not really sure, right? And so if patrol's responding and it's like a questionable suicide, it's like you're going to have to go out there and look at that.
Sure.
I think one of them that I was involved with, which is really interesting, is actually, I don't know if I should talk about this one because it was involved with someone in the department, not directly, but through a relative. So I'm not going to talk about that one just because, we have a lot of shared connections. But that's the kind of stuff you're going to, right? And so there's a lot of those kind of just, some of it's peculiar and some of it is just the gangland shootings, but everything is so different, I don't know. You see a lot.
Well,
that's very gray and broad, so I apologize, but
no, I do understand if it's still going through the legal process. What would you say is the most difficult part of being a homicide detective?
Yeah, great question. I guess that answer is different for everyone, but I can cover like some of the kind of common issues with it that, I've seen other people encounter, including myself, and I'll talk about my own as well and just try and be like transparent with everything we do. And everything I do. But yeah, I mean, the homicide is like so demanding. Any kind of specialty unit is extremely demanding. I mean, so like through patrol, you finish your shift and you're done, right? You drop the keys, you turn in your equipment, and you're off for the day. And, occasionally you get stuck on some containment for a little bit extra until your buddy relieves you, and that's it. But homicide is so demanding. I mean, you're on call every other week, 24 hours a day, right? And so that's very demanding. It impacts your personal life with your family. It impacts your mental health, just having that hanging over you. And the expectation was really we work 10-hour days, right? But the expectation from that unit was to be there 12 hours a day. Whatever is going on, not even on your on-call weeks, they want you there every day working overtime. And
Really?
if you've, yeah, and they're not going to say that, but that is the expectation. They do tell you that, like behind closed doors. So they do literally tell you that, but they don't have it as like obviously like an SOP or something.
Sure.
But if you leave after your 10 hours, there's this real like cliquey, like judgmental vibe where everyone's like, why? Oh, you're leaving. That's what you get. Oh, you're taking off. What do you got going on? Well, it's like, well, I've been hustling for 10 hours. You've been kind of like chilling for 4 hours. Like, I think it's time to go. But
So you're looked down upon if you're not making this your primary aspect of your life, essentially.
Yeah. And I mean, and I think you should. I mean, that's such a important job, right? We're talking about the stuff you see in movies and television and all the like kind of like fantasy of being a homicide detective and stuff like that. But like at the end of the day, like it's someone's family member, even if like they're the worst felon in the world, like they're the worst gangster. He walked into it, he was shooting a bunch of people and he got clipped. He's still someone's son, right? Or daughter or
Sure.
whatever. And
Yeah.
so you're helping the family, right? Trying to solve that. And so that's where it is really important to like really give it everything you got because there's such high value cases. So I think for
Great.
anyone going into that, you should be willing to do that. And you don't really know with anything in life until you get into it if it's a good fit. And so that's one of the biggest challenges is just the overwhelming work and dedication day in and day out. The secondary piece of that, and I don't know if this is the same for every department, but for me, I just didn't like the culture upstairs in our unit. And so I noticed that from day one. I loved being a cop and I loved a bunch of the guys I worked with on patrol and stuff like that. You know, you really develop these close relationships with people. And I think that's because you're in very stressful environments. And so there's a real bond just by, having a buddy where you're responding where it's like, hey, we're going to get out of this call. And if we have to fight, we're going to fight this dude together. And that's what you do. And if someone's going to start shooting at us, you have my back, I have your back. And just by going to those kind of things, you develop that bond with people. I found the like vibe when I went upstairs in that unit to be just really competitive, and just not very supportive. And so I didn't love that. And the
Sure.
other thing for me is like, I'm a pretty positive person, and I would like to surround myself with that. And that's the, touching on the company culture of Social Sleuth, very hardworking, hustle, but like I hire people that I want to work with every day. You know what I mean? That have a
Yeah.
similar mindset, that are supportive. Yes, high threshold of work quality and talent, and really try to find those A players. But I find people I want to be on a call with, like you today, that we can just talk and work through issues and try and grow the company. And so the vibe up there was just, everyone was just so fucking burnt out every single day, day in and day out. And they're always like, gossiping about each other and all this kind of shit. And that's the challenge number two. And I know you probably saw that through every function you've been at. Like, it's a very political thing through police departments, through like promotions, through like, discipline, through everything across the sun. And so that's the second thing where I don't know if that's every department, but for me, that's something I didn't love there. Then the third thing I would say is just the trauma that you get from going to these things every day.
Yeah.
And so you're just seeing the most terrible things day in, a day out, 7 days a week. I can't even remember all the stuff like I've seen. Like a lot of it you just like bury in your brain. And same thing on the patrol. Like you said, you are the first call out to that scene on a patrol function. And then later the detectives come in. So it's the same thing with street cops. You're the first one there. You're still going to see that body there. And so the trauma is the other thing. It's just, even if you're naturally resilient, you're seeing so much of that stuff every day. And it's not just like the bodies and like, shotgun blasts and people hanging or like kids that have been hurt. It's just like, just that whole vibe. I got that weight from the prison too. And you're assigned, the dude's mother who got shot and he's dead. And now you have to like hang out with that mom for like 2 hours while like a victim's advocate comes in. It's all those little things, right? Going to a death notification where you're talking to their parents and you have to be the first one to tell that person their kid is dead. Like, it is heavy. And for 1,000 reasons, it's heavy. And so I think that's the other big piece of the puzzle when it comes to like the hardest piece of the job, is just being exposed to that day in and day out. It's challenging. It's very interesting. I'm not saying it's not, one of the most fascinating things you can do when it comes to investigations and crime. It really is. There's nothing more advanced and more important than a homicide investigation, like we talked about, for the family and to solve that and the resources that go into it. But it is, it's a lot of weight on the mind, just being exposed to like, the most terrible things anyone has ever done day in and day out. And I noticed that too, even when I know there's like a true crime podcast, so people want to hear about this stuff, so it's totally fine. But I notice that sometimes when I'm like talking to friends or people who I haven't seen for a while who are like, hey, tell me this crazy story or whatever. And, I told one where it's like this dude like committed suicide on a train track and it literally took his head off. And it's like his head is like 8 feet from his body. And then you see the room like go cold and you're like, oh, shit, like maybe I shouldn't have said that. Because, when we talk cop to cop, it's just we're used to it, right? Like we're resilient.
Very blunt, yeah.
We've seen that stuff. Police have this dark humor, right? And I think that helps us deal with like the shit we see every single day.
Sure.
But that's not the case if you start sharing these stories with people. And so if the average person can't handle just a mid-level traumatic story or whatever, because it's crazy, right? Can you imagine the stuff that you're putting yourself through day in, day out, actually seeing that stuff? And like, a homicide investigation, it's not like, packaged into a 30-minute television show, start to finish, a whole investigation. You might be out on that scene for like 14 hours before they even like finish, maybe longer. You know what I mean? So it's like you're exposed to that, all the smell of death. If no one knows what a body smells like, it smells terrible. Like there's a lot of that kind of stuff you don't think about.
Well, it's really interesting. I really agree with you in the fact that there is a threshold that I think normal civilians, they can't quite, they just don't have the tolerance for it when it comes to death investigations. And I can remember where I learned the same lesson you brought up, and that was when I talked to my mom about something that I had seen on an investigation. It was a death investigation. And I don't remember what the investigation was, but I brought it up because she was asking me, what I had been doing or what I've seen during the week, kind of the same as your friends there. And I told her, and after that, she told me she never wanted to hear anymore. She didn't want to hear about it. And what was really interesting to me was when you get shut down like that and you can't talk about it, especially with people that you care about, you start to internalize a lot of those things because you don't feel like you can talk about it. It's funny because people always say, well, you should bring that up with your family. You should talk to your family about it. But I think a lot of times what they don't understand is the family sometimes is resistant. Like they don't want to hear about this violent homicide that you went on or this murder scene. And so you start to wonder who you can truly talk to. And that's hard for any cop, but as a former homicide detective, I mean, I can see where you're coming from. That's got to be brutal in some circumstances.
Yeah, I agree.
I tell you what, so we're brushing up on our time. I know you are a busy man, and I want to make the best use of your time. We've got about 10 minutes left. I want to hear about your company, okay?
Yeah.
Social Sleuth. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I'll try and keep it succinct. But I left the police department, wanted to start a private sector company. And so my original idea was to kind of start a traditional PI firm, right? And take that experience I'd learned through, homicide and through patrol and all that kind of stuff and start a private sector company. And so I started Social Sleuth, and we kind of evolved. And so we've talked about a lot of this before when it comes to entrepreneurial endeavors. It's like you get ideas, and the best thing, I think I told this to you, is like the best thing you can do is kind of test stuff quickly and then fail quickly at it, and then continually iterate on your idea. And so the sooner you can get like a product to market, I'm just going to give you like some business trinkets or whatever, because I know you like that a little too or whatever, so I'll touch on that. But the sooner you can like test those product ideas and stuff like that, the sooner you can like modify and pivot slightly and stuff like that. And so that was kind of the case with Social Sleuth. Started as a PI firm, but where we were seeing a lot of traction, it was through like social media investigations. And so that's what we kind of doubled down on. And so with any business, wherever you see traction, then that's what you double down on. And if you see traction somewhere else, you expand on that, et cetera, et cetera. And you just continuously do that as you build the company. And so that's where we hammered in on. And so in the first kind of year, we were just kind of like trying to find our product market fit. And taking anything that would come in. So we would work with like a lot of individuals, it's an infidelity case. I'm trying to get due diligence on a business partner, just a bunch of random stuff. And then over time, we just kind of focused in more on B2B, business to business platform, and got rid of these individual people. And the idea there was just when you solve an individual's problem, they're gone, right? And so you solve their problem, they don't come back as a recurring customer. And so the guide to growth was creating recurring annual revenue. And if you have that through business to business, who always have work coming in, then it allows you to grow your company. And so that's what we focused in on. And so we work with law firms. We work with other PI firms. And so a lot of PI firms are focused on surveillance and, traditional investigation stuff we did. But they aren't a huge fan of doing all the like cyber social media investigations. And so we handle the heavy lifting for them as strategic partners. And then another area we help with is trial consulting and trial research. And so we work with a lot of like high profile trials, all the big stuff that you see in the news that we're not allowed to talk about because I have confidentiality agreements, but like, oil spills because of a train crash, or a famous rapper that had a concert and someone died there because they were rioting and he was stirring up the crowd, or like top political figures as we know who they are and all that kind of stuff. That's mostly what we're dealing with. And we're basically doing investigations on potential jurors and finding out what they're all about and looking for actionable insights relevant for the case. And we feed that to the trial teams and allows them to make informed decisions. And that's kind of some of the stuff we're working on. It's a lot of the same investigative techniques that we like drive in through our work product. It's just like in a cyber and social media grounded space.
Can you give me an example of the type of evidence that you're actually looking for in one of these investigations?
Yeah, I mean, it's different for every case type. And so that's where we're very, the word of the day is bespoke, but like we take more of a hands-on approach. And so a lot of firms are, they're more like dealing with like personal injury, slip and fall, because they like to serve the big insurance companies, which we help with too. But we take more of that like traditional investigative approach, and we're hands-on with our research. And so every case is different. And so it's, sometimes it's looking for general intelligence because they're looking to go into a business transaction between two companies, or they're trying to invest in someone, et cetera. It might be like a sex assault criminal defense where they're looking for like patterns of evidence to help, their client. We work both plaintiff and defense side. We're a hired gun. We're pretty diverse there. If it's personal injury, they're trying to establish, pattern of evidence, anything talking about the incident, prior matters. If it's like a larger complex study, they're trying to, establish patterns to show like at the time of trial, there was a lot of notoriety behind a defendant, and that impacted, the fairness of the trial. And if you can establish that evidence, what people are saying, that could help, with the change of venue. There's just a whole lot of anything you could think of in like a civil litigation space or criminal defense space. We work all sorts of stuff. And so sometimes it's very like wide in the request, and sometimes it's very narrow. We have like simple cases like, hey, this dude defaulted on his Ferrari financing. Can you locate where he's at? And then we have stuff where it's like, hey, there's like 5,000 articles on the internet, and this thing is across like multiple states. Can you do a gigantic, like complex study that would help with this, strategy in court for this big trial coming up, stuff like that. So
that's awesome.
Narrow and wide.
And I tell you what, I know we're backing up against our time. I wonder if you'd be open to do a follow-up podcast sometime soon where we can delve a little bit deeper. I don't think we really hashed out truly what your business is about. I mean, of course, you told us some of the in broad strokes, but man, there is a lot to dig into there that I'd love to hear. How would you feel about doing something like that in the near future?
Yeah, happy to do that. Yeah, I think we covered a lot of grounds here, but yeah, I mean, each area of what we talked about today, you could probably do a separate podcast. So
That's
happy to
right.
talk more about Social Sleuth. You can find us online, socialsleuth.com, and kind of see what we got going on. And we're active on LinkedIn if you want to check us out there. And if you want to send me a connection request on LinkedIn, that's pretty well where we live with the business is on LinkedIn.
Well, that sounds great. Well, I encourage all of our viewers, listeners, if you are interested, and I hope that you are, please check out Social Sleuth. And I will be checking you out there, Colin. And I can't thank you enough for coming on today, my friend.
You bet. Nice to be here, and I appreciate your time, Chris.
All right. Take care, brother. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Mugshot Podcast. Like and subscribe where you can, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.